Storage is the great fascinating story of probably the next 10 years in energy.
For years, utilities have asserted that integrating large amounts of renewable energy on the grid is a major technical challenge. But one island-based electric cooperative is already close to getting half their daytime energy from solar power. What makes it possible? To explain, I'm joined this week by Jan TenBruggencate, a second-term board member of the Kauai Island Electric Cooperative in Hawaii. I'm John Farrell, and this is Local Energy Rules, a podcast sharing powerful stories of successful local renewable energy and exposing the policy and practical barriers to its expansion. Jan, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, what was so remarkable to me in learning about the efforts that you've made on renewable energy is that in a decade between about 2006 and then coming up through next year, you're prepared to quintuple the percentage of energy that you get from renewables from about 8% to over 40%. I've read stuff suggesting that, as much as half of your daytime energy use is going to be supplied by solar energy. What motivated such a rapid shift toward renewables?
Well, some of it was our design, but clearly some of it was also changes in the industry which reduced the cost, specifically solar installations. So we have kind of a perfect storm for renewables. Tax credits have also played a role. In our case, our members have built, I think we anticipate by the end of next year, 14 megawatts or so. We have additionally built considerable amounts of solar. We have a 12 megawatt solar array in construction and another 12 megawatts that has just been approved by the landowner that we plan to start construction on within the next couple of months. And additionally, we have private companies that are building and selling us, or have built and are selling us another 7 or 8 megawatts of power. The result's pretty dramatic. Actually, on a sunny day, we have the potential that more than half of our power will be coming from solar, probably by the middle of next year.
Now, you mentioned this already in your answer to that question about the 14 megawatts coming from your customers. It will represent as much as a third of your renewable capacity at the end of 2015. Was that deliberate to have so many of your customers producing energy for the utility?
No, it wasn't deliberate at all, and it's not clear to me that we anticipated that. In connection with federal tax credits and state tax credits in the state of Hawaii, you can, in tax credits, get back 65% of the value of a renewable installation. That plus the reduced cost of solar, arrays that cost $30,000 to put in 3 or 4 years ago have dropped by half or more. And suddenly it's a slam dunk for folks who have the cash to step forward and do the project. So we've seen hundreds of households that have put solar on their roofs. And I'm not sure about this number, but I've heard something like 10% of the roofs on the island now have solar photovoltaics on them.
Now, one thing I found interesting is that, most folks on the mainland are familiar with when customers do a solar installation that they use net metering, where they get to turn their meter backwards as their solar array produces energy, and then it rolls forward when they're using energy. But the Kauai Island Utility doesn't offer net metering anymore and instead has what some people are familiar with is called a feed-in tariff. You pay a fixed price that's lower than the retail rate over 20 years, but of course still, I think about 20 cents a kilowatt hour, if I'm not mistaken. Has that worked out well? Was there a lot of objection to switching to that kind of program instead of net metering?
Well, pure net metering was a pilot project established by our Public Utilities Commission, which is a state regulatory commission, to, in essence, to get solar started. And as you and most of your listeners will know, to the degree that you run your meter backwards, your neighbors are helping subsidize your electric costs because you're not paying a lot of the fixed costs of the utility that are associated with a variety of things, including having to have traditional generating sources. In our case, that's diesel and naphtha-fired power plants available for the periods when the sun's not shining, even though when your solar's going, you're not paying for a portion of that cost, of that investment. When that net metering portion that was approved by the PUC filled up, we moved on to a system that more fairly allocates costs, in our opinion, and that was what we call Schedule Q. It's not properly a feed-in tariff. It's not exactly like a feed-in tariff, but it's close. in which the cost of the solar is linked to our cost of oil-fired power. And that ends up being 20 or 25 cents in that range. That's what it costs us to generate power from oil on a kilowatt-hour basis. We anticipate that those numbers will change somewhat over time because increasingly solar is the alternative. Solar generated by us and by our power purchase agreement partners is the comparable rather than oil-fired power, because we're going to be, we hope, within 3 or 4 years, producing a majority of our power from renewables that are coming in at below the cost of oil-fired power. Unfortunately, our power costs are very high to start with, as are the power costs of any utility that runs primarily on oil, which we have chosen as a community not to use coal, which is much lower cost, and which the utilities in the other Hawaiian Islands use. And we use low-sulfur liquid fuels, which are higher cost than the high-sulfur liquid fuels that some others use. The result of that is that for us, renewables in almost every case are less expensive in terms of their cost to produce power than the traditional fossil fuel uses that we're employing.
You know, most cooperative utilities, like the one that you're a member of, formed decades ago, but Kauai's was put together, I believe it was in 2002. Why did a bunch of folks, business folks, residents on Kauai want to own their own utility?
Well, once again, it was kind of a perfect storm. We had an investor-owned utility that wanted to get out of the business. It still wanted to be in the utility business, just not in the electric business. It was switching from power generation to communications. So it was looking for a buyer. And this community actively began participating in a process of looking at the alternatives. Did we want to be controlled once again by an outside of the state corporation, or did we want to take it on ourselves? And among the alternatives that we looked at were the cooperative model, which is used throughout the United States, and municipal ownership. Our county actually put into its charter a language that would have allowed the county to have acquired the utility. But ultimately, the plan that went forward was the one to have a cooperative with the assistance of federal financing by the electric company from previous owner with Citizens Utilities.
Coming back to the renewable energy efforts that you have made so far, and you already talked about the fact that renewables are going to be, in many cases, less costly than some of the fossil fuels that you've been using. You know, is Kauai going to be the first 100% renewable energy utility? Is the goal something short of that or somewhere in between, or what is the next step?
By the end of the year or maybe early next year, we may have more solar on our system than any utility in the country, maybe in the world, I don't know. And it's hard to foresee at this point a future that has absolutely no fossil fuels in it, but theoretically that's possible. Currently, solar is our biggest chunk of renewable on our system. We're about to bring a biomass facility online owned by a PPA, a power purchase agreement partner, that will burn waste or invasive tree species. And that'll be 15% or so of our power generation. We're looking at a couple of hydroelectric opportunities. The one that seems to make the most economic sense in this community is solar. We live in Hawaii in the subtropics, and we have a fair amount of sun. And we're now actively looking at storage opportunities that will be able to take some of that daytime solar power and move it into the evening hours when we don't have it. If that becomes a reality, I can foresee us retiring a bunch of our fossil fuel-powered generation plants. But until that's the case, they're nice to have for backup, and as long as you've got them sitting there, I'm not sure you're at 100%. So it's conceivable that we get there, but I'm not sure it's realistic, at least in the medium term, to think that we'll be at 100% of the time.
It's a perfect segue for my next question about energy storage. I am doing some research right now on an energy storage report that will be coming out here in March, and have already written a section about your utility and the fact that it has deployed several battery storage facilities at substations where you have, large installations of solar power. It sounds like that's not enough to go 100% renewable because you're not necessarily storing power during the day for all of the nighttime. But how is energy storage, helping the utilities shift toward renewables? What role is that battery storage playing?
Storage is the great fascinating story of probably the next 10 years in energy, in my opinion. The way we're using storage currently involves the installation of significant containers full of batteries at a couple of our solar plants. But they are primarily being used not to shift load into the nighttime hours, but to normalize the power from the solar plant so that we don't end up with brownout. The short version of it is when the sun stops shining or, a cloud falls over the solar panels, you suddenly get a drop in production. And what the batteries do is they quickly step in and cover losses in generation caused by the clouds coming in. And what we're looking forward to in the future is the ability to move a lot of that solar power into other parts of the day. And that's going to probably require different kinds of batteries, different kinds of storage. There are dozens of different kinds of chemical batteries, heat storage types of batteries. Most of those battery technologies are still pretty expensive and added to the cost of generating the power, the cost of storage, and the losses as you move from one energy source to another. They tend not to be economically efficient, at least for us. We are looking at the potential of using pumped storage. We have some pretty impressive elevation changes on our island, and if you're able to pump water uphill to a reservoir in the daytime when you've got excess solar power, and then run it back down the hill through a generator to generate power at night, that looks like a pretty cost-effective, large-scale storage mechanism that could help push us to much nearer 100% renewables.
You mentioned the price that you pay to solar producers is pegged to what the alternative is, which in Kauai, of course, is quite expensive, unlike many of the other mainland utilities. Has there been a conversation about this sort of notion of a value of solar or a cost-benefit analysis that would give you more information about that? Or do folks seem pretty happy with the program that you've come up with, given the expensive nature of the alternatives?
Realistically, folks are seldom happy with high electricity prices, and we have high electricity prices. To your last question, are people satisfied? I don't think folks are ever satisfied. We are certainly constantly looking at ways to adjust to existing markets, to existing needs. Unfortunately, I guess, the regulatory scheme moves very slowly and is not keeping up with changes in the industry. We are forced to pay by our regulations a price for solar that is far higher if we're paying it to private individuals than the solar that we are able to generate ourselves. As an example, we pay in excess of 20 cents a kilowatt hour for the solar from power purchase agreement partners, but we ourselves are able to produce solar in the range of 12 cents.
Well, Jan, I don't have any more questions for you. Do you feel like there's anything that I've missed or things that other folks would want to know about the work of your utility?
The one thing that you talked about at the beginning a little bit is, we're operating under the cooperative model, and the cooperative model is a remarkable tool for small communities in dealing with their energy. And I'll just note that a combination of being able to make our own decisions as a community as opposed to having those decisions made in places far away has benefits. Our access to low-cost capital, the fact that we don't need to make a profit helps keep our costs under control. So even though we have some of the highest rates for electricity in the country, our rates comparatively have been under good control. When we became a cooperative, our rates were something like 80% higher than the island of Oahu, where the city of Honolulu is. Currently, they're 15 or 20% higher. So we are closing the gap and have some hope that we'll actually be able to provide cheaper power than some of the other utilities in the state as a result of the work we've done.
That was John Farrell, ILSR's Director of Democratic Energy, speaking with Jan TenBruggencate, board member of the Kauai Island Electric Cooperative, in February 2014. You can read more about this Kauai utility's remarkable progress on renewable energy in our forthcoming report, Energy Storage, the Next Charge for Distributed Energy, at ilsr.org, where you'll also find 17 more episodes of our Local Energy Rules podcast. Until next time, keep your energy local, and thanks for listening.